the young man suddenly spit out a large pile of earthworms, which instantly formed a huge monster. Trying to get back into his body, the young man rode a motorcycle and plunged downhill. The earthworm monster chased after him frantically. The motorcycle raced towards a lumberyard on the ground, while the earthworms burrowed into the waterway. In a critical moment, the young man and his companion hid in a factory. They opened a massive wood chipper. He rode the motorcycle, luring the monster onto the conveyor belt. The wood chipper crushed the earthworms into pulp, and sprayed them into the river, turning them into ready-made bait. The latest thrilling TV series, Goosebumps, is now released. Various bizarre stories take turns to unfold. On a typical day in 1993, Mike was in the basement making a scrapbook. He loved horror and weird themes. He would spend a whole day on a single drawing, until the doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Mike opened the door to check, but there was no one in the yard. He was about to return to the basement, but the doorbell rang again, and the chandelier behind him suddenly fell, plunging the whole room into darkness. Mike quickly lit a candle, nervously looking around. A wall clock on one side kept ringing. Mike held the candle and hid in the basement. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door forcefully. He fell down the stairs. The candle fell and instantly ignited the floor. Enormous flames erupted from the room. Time flew by and suddenly it was the year 2023. Gene became the new owner of this rundown house. He couldn't believe he acquired a house for free. It was said that the previous owner died in a fire. His parents also mysteriously disappeared. The house had been vacant for 30 years. He was the only relative of the former owner, thus becoming the new owner of the house. Construction worker Carter was responsible for renovating the entire house. He mentioned that it would take some time before anyone could move in. At this moment, Gene noticed the locked basement, and wanted to open the door and take a look, but Carter said the lock was stuck, and it couldn't be opened now. Upon hearing this, Gene picked up an iron rod to pry open the lock. However, not only did he fail to open the lock, but he also cut his hand. Carter helped Gene and treated his wound. The blood that fell on the ground formed a line, and all of it seeped into the keyhole. The tightly closed wooden door suddenly opened. Could this be a genetic lock? That night, a car approached the wooden house. 3 high school students got out of the car. The leader, Colin, was Carter's son. He heard from his father that before the new homeowner moved in, there wouldn't be anyone in this house, so he wanted to use the place to throw a makeup party for his girlfriend, Helen. The 3 of them heard that someone had died here, and thought it would fit perfectly with the Halloween party theme. Colin quickly set up the colored lights at the venue, but in the next second, the power went out. The 3 of them turned on flashlights, and searched for the switch box. Unexpectedly, the door to the basement creaked open. Before they could enter, another person emerged from the house. Colin realized it was their neighbor, Maggie. Helen glared at her boyfriend. Why did he invite Maggie over? And she was the teacher's daughter. In fact, Colin wanted to get an A in a major history exam, so that he could secure his spot in the football championship. He had recently begged Maggie to help him cheat, and had casually invited her to the party. Colin had forgotten about it after saying it, but he didn't expect Maggie to actually show up. However, they couldn't just chase her away. Colin decided to go into the basement first, to find the location of the switch box. As he looked at the eerie basement, he felt a little scared. Then Colin noticed an old-fashioned camera. He was examining it closely. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut. The 3 outside the door tried to open it. The door lock got stuck again. A few people stared at the basement. The next second, Colin stuck his head out with the camera. Helen angrily scolded him not to play pranks, but Colin held up the camera and took pictures. However, it wasn't an instant camera. It had to be processed to develop the photos. Then the lights in the house returned to normal. Colin was puzzled by this. He hadn't found the switch box, so how did the power suddenly come back? Soon, the others entered the party venue. Maggie couldn't fit in at all. She came because she had a crush on Colin, but he stayed with his girlfriend the whole time. Classmate little Jessie noticed Maggie feeling down, so he approached her to start a conversation.
Let me guess, you came as yourself.
No, came as a guy with brain damage.
Maggie knew that Jessie had feelings for her, but she couldn't give any response. She didn't want to stay here anymore, so she said goodbye to Colin and left the party. Just as Maggie left, the homeowner, Gene, entered the room. He warned everyone to leave quickly, or else he would call the police. Upon hearing this, everyone immediately ran away. Helen got lost in the woods with the crowd. She saw the shadow of a man with long hair, thinking it was someone from the party. She asked the person how to get back to the main road, but the figure remained silent. Feeling scared, Helen turned around and left. Unexpectedly, the suspicious figure appeared again. She screamed and turned to run. Helen was so scared that she collapsed on the ground. Fortunately, Colin heard the scream and rushed over in time. He helped her and they left the woods together. The next day, Helen took a few days off to rest. At that moment, Colin was chatting with a friend. While talking, he saw Jean, so he averted his gaze, fearing that Jean would recognize him. Unexpectedly, the next second, Jean called out Colin's name. It turned out that the protagonist had left his backpack in Jean's house. Colin awkwardly thanked him, saying that you came all the way here to deliver it personally. Jean said, "Anyway, I have to come to work." It turns out he's the new English teacher. Colin was really embarrassed now. Fortunately, Jean was easygoing. He warned Colin not to sneak into his house anymore, and that this matter could be forgotten. Colin breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this. He opened his backpack and found the photos from last night, but inside were the death photos of his girlfriend and Maggie. What on earth had happened? On the other side, Maggie was buying an energy bar at the vending machine. She noticed a man with long hair in the hallway, so she asked him what the matter was, but the person remained silent. At that moment, the school bell rang. A large amount of students flooded into the hallway. The mysterious man also disappeared along with them. Suddenly, Maggie felt difficulty in breathing. Nuts appeared in the food she often bought. Maggie had a severe allergic reaction. Fortunately, Colin arrived in time. He took out the epinephrine pen from Maggie's bag, and quickly injected it into her. Then Colin took out the two photos, and compared them to Maggie's clothes. He was shocked to find that they matched perfectly, which means if he hadn't arrived in time, Maggie would have suffocated from the allergic reaction. And last night, Helen was also in danger in the forest, facing a life-threatening situation. There must be something wrong with the camera in the basement. He wanted to tell his best friend James about this, but the photos turned white. James thought Colin was playing a prank, and snatched the camera to take a picture of him. Then he sat in the car and left. Colin took out the newly taken photo, seeing himself lying on the football field, with his entire left arm severed at the elbow. He didn't know what to do, so he could only seek help from Maggie. Colin had to participate in the football game, in order to attract scouts and secure a scholarship, but except for him, no one else could see the photos. Maggie was very disappointed when she learned why he had come. She had thought Colin came over because he was concerned about her allergy, but it turned out he came to seek her help. Colin only thought of Maggie when he encountered trouble, and their interaction was unpleasant. Colin couldn't come up with a solution, so he smashed the camera and burned it, and then resolutely stepped onto the football field. He was energetic throughout the first half, leading the team to make the opponents feel defeated, but during half-time, Colin discovered the camera in his locker. He instantly became anxious, and soon began to have hallucinations. Colin saw his teammates and referees, all transformed into the appearance of a long-haired man, and this person was none other than Mike, who had been burned to death. At this moment, the entire stadium was on fire. The football melted due to the high temperature, sticking tightly to his hand, but nobody else could see anything unusual except Colin. He struggled alone in the hallucination. All the players turned into burning corpses. They charged towards Colin as if possessed. Finally, he fell to the ground and broke his arm. Although he managed to save his arm, Colin would miss the entire season, and he would lose his scholarship. At that moment, the restaurant owner from town came to the hospital. She called Carter to the hallway for a conversation, and told him that she saw Mike at the football field. The boy came to seek revenge on us. In just a few sentences, there was a lot of information. It seemed that some adults were hiding something. At the same time, Jean was sitting inside the house, when suddenly the fireplace fire went out. He was about to get up and check, but he saw Mike standing in front of him. The other person turned into a thick smoke and entered Jean's body. Let's temporarily set aside this storyline, as a subplot is unfolding simultaneously. Let's go back to before the party took place. Besides prominent figures like Colin at Lawrenceport High School, there are also some inconspicuous characters. Bella, an Asian girl, happens to be the most transparent one. Even though she is an assistant for the football team, she is ignored by all the players, including the coach. Before class, Bella sees Maggie arguing with her father, and approaches her to offer comfort, but Maggie treats her as if she's invisible, and walks past her without acknowledging her. Bella sighs and goes upstairs for class. Unexpectedly, she almost gets knocked over by little Jessie.
Are you insane? You almost just killed me!
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
Bella enters the classroom, suppressing her frustration, and gets bumped into by Helen. Her pent-up emotions are on the verge of erupting. Coincidentally, Helen is chatting with her friends, saying she plans to throw a party while her parents are away. Upon hearing this, Bella immediately sends a private message to Helen's parents to inform them. It's because of this that the party venue changes to Jean's house. Bella initially wanted to ruin that party as well, but her younger brother persuades her to join and have fun. Perhaps by actively integrating, she can escape the state of being invisible. Bella thinks it made sense and decides to give it a try. She dresses up as a vampire and enters the venue, but she sees Helen and her friends laughing at her. Bella has a strong sense of inferiority complex. She immediately hides in a secluded place and takes a deep breath. Unexpectedly, the door to the basement opens silently. Her voice calls out to Bella. She gathers her courage and enters the basement. Following the voice's guidance, she finds a mask. Bella takes a deep breath and puts on the mask. As a result, she undergoes a drastic transformation. She takes off her cloak and reveals her attractive figure. No longer timid, she catches everyone's attention. After the party ends, she happily runs back home, but she realizes it's difficult to take off the mask. Yet, Bella isn't bothered by it. She lies in bed and laughs, still reminiscing about the party. Meanwhile, the discarded mask reveals a sinister smile. The next day, Bella goes to school as usual, but before leaving, she hears the mask calling to her. After some hesitation, she puts the mask in her bag. Gene wakes up from his dream. He seems to have forgotten about the previous night. He checks the time and hurries out for work. Unexpectedly, his limbs seem to act on their own. He doesn't realize how many jokes he unintentionally causes. He rushes into the restroom, but he sees Mike in the mirror. It seems that Mike has taken control of Gene. On the other hand, Colin is troubled by his injury. Maggie sets aside their previous conflict and approaches him to apologize. However, Colin remains silent about the incident on the field. At this point, he doesn't want to involve Maggie. Colin decides to search for the truth on his own. He goes to school and asks Bella for the video of the game. In the process, he mistakenly calls her by the wrong name. Bella doesn't mind. She takes Colin to the editing room and then leaves. To her surprise, she sees little Jessie right after leaving, who accidentally broke her expensive drone. The teacher calls both of them to the office to discuss. Little Jessie doesn't have that much money. He suggests paying $5 a week until it's fully repaid. Considering Bella's previous personality, she would normally compromise and agree to negotiate. But this time, the mask in her bag keeps urging Bella to resist. She gathers the courage to refuse the teacher's proposal. She claims that the drone is worth $3,000, paying $5 a week. When will it be fully repaid?
If this moron somehow manages to graduate, he will never make that money back flipping burgers for the rest of his...
The counselor feels that Bella's words are too harsh and intends to educate her, but ends up being insulted by Bella during the conversation.
You're a high school guidance counselor. You literally failed at life.
Bella suddenly realizes what she's been saying halfway through and quickly apologizes to the teacher, while also sparing Jessie from compensation. Bella, due to damaging the drone, is grounded at home by her mother and has all her electronic devices confiscated. The mask takes advantage of this opportunity to delude Bella, claiming that it can solve the issue. But, of course, the counselor cannot let the student incur such a significant loss, so he have to negotiate with Jessie's mother, who happens to be the restaurant owner at the hospital. There is a certain ambiguity between the counselor and this parent. After the counselor leaves, Gene, possessed by Mike, appears. He pretends to come and buy bread, but actually intends to probe Jessie's mother to find out if she has forgotten about the fire incident. Gene's mention of Mike's death seems very unnatural. It appears that the accident 30 years ago was not a coincidence. Jessie's mother decided to talk to Colin. As she was about to take something out of her bag, Carter came over and distracted her son, and warned Jessie's mother not to involve her child, and then went back to the room. Meanwhile, Jessie's mother stopped Maggie, who was passing by, and showed her the photo of Mike from her bag, and let Maggie to ask Colin if he had seen the young man in the photo. Maggie went to find Colin that evening. Colin immediately recognized him as the strange person on the field. They planned to find Jessie's mother to clarify the situation, but she had already went off work. While Jessie was nearby playing on a skateboard, he accidentally kicked the board into a dark area. Bella, wearing a mask, picked up the board and forcefully threw it towards Jessie. She approached him step by step with a sinister smile. Bella's face gradually merged with the mask as she was about to approach, but was interrupted by Helen and the other. Bella quickly escaped to avoid exposing her identity. She remained in a monstrous state after returning home. Her younger brother noticed an intruder and quickly called his sister for help. Unexpectedly, the ringing of the phone came from the person in black. He had no choice but to hide in the warehouse. Little did he know, Bella also chased after him. The young boy recognized her wearing his sister's clothes and kept shouting Bella's name. Fortunately, Bella regained her senses, desperately tearing off the mask from her face, and finally returned to normal. The next day, the siblings threw the mask into the river, deciding to forget about the strange incident. Meanwhile, the parents of the children gathered at James's house, discussing the possibility of Mike's return, while Bella and James hid inside the house playing pool. Unexpectedly, she hit a ball, and James suddenly burst open on the spot, spewing out a puddle of yellow slime. What exactly happened to him? We need to start from that party. James is a very special child. He is a female-to-male transgender, recently infatuated with his classmate David. James came to the party, hoping to get closer to him, but David was cold towards him. James left the party, unexpectedly bumped into an invisible barrier. As he got up, confused, he realized that time had gone back by an hour, and James was trapped in a loop, unable to leave the party. He tried countless times with no success. Only the clock kept ringing and the pointer kept moving backward. James could only sit at the party, dazed. Unexpectedly, David approached and struck up a conversation. James suddenly had an idea. He could use the time loop to continuously talk to David until he fully understood his preferences and successfully piqued his interest. James's move was very successful. David thought he had found his soulmate. He invited James to leave the party with him. Upon hearing this, James hurriedly destroyed the clock and took a deep breath before stepping out of the cabin. Unexpectedly, it worked. He successfully escaped the party and formed a relationship with David, but an accident happened soon after. James woke up and discovered that there were many clones of himself at home. Apparently, every time he entered the time tunnel, a new clone of himself would be created. To make matters worse, the clones knocked James unconscious and trapped him in an abandoned mine. So whether it was the James playing pool or the James going to school as usual, they were all fake replicas created by the time tunnel, and the clones had their own personalities. They not only broke up with David, but also tried to sabotage Helen's relationship with her boyfriend, claiming that Colin was always with Maggie. Such obvious changes in personality, James's friends and mother didn't notice, until Bella just shattered one of the clones, revealing the truth of the situation. But the parents didn't believe Bella's words. The only solution was to let others see it with their own eyes. So Bella found the right moment. In front of Colin and Maggie, she personally shattered one of the clones.
Don't get it on me! I don't want James juice on me!
Maggie explained the cause and effect to the others, including the story of the magical mask. All the unexpected connections were related to Mike's house, so the three of them went to find Jessi's mother, to find out the truth of the matter. But the parents had just had a meeting, and they didn't want to involve the children. So Jessi's mother refused to say much. She only said that if they really wanted to know the truth, they should go ask Maggie's mother. The problem was that Maggie's parents' marriage was in crisis. The couple was living apart. Maggie didn't want to disturb her mother, so they could only stake out at James's house, hoping to track down the original by following the clones. The three of them followed the clones to an old mine. The whole process seemed a bit too smooth. They always felt like something was amiss. As expected, the mine lit up with lights the next second, and a mining cart came rushing towards them. They tried to turn around and escape, but they were blocked by a group of clones. Just then, one, James, pointed the way for them. Just as the main group thought he was the original, another James appeared. Both claimed to be the real one. Colin couldn't tell them apart. He simply picked up a stick and swung at them. As long as they shattered, they were fakes. But the problem was that there was no real James there. The clones took the opportunity to knock Colin unconscious and threw him into the mine. James was excited to see his good friend.
Man, I've been down here for so long. I thought I was gonna die.
Colin immediately apologized to his friend. Just then, a wall on one side suddenly collapsed. It turned out that Maggie and the others had followed the sound and found their location. Colin and James had just planned to leave the mine, but they were blocked by a group of clones. It seemed like they had to confront them directly now. Although these clones looked intimidating, they shattered with a single strike, and even smelled like watermelon gummies. They really had no fighting power, so Colin and James didn't have to exert much effort to defeat them and escape from the mine. After this incident, Maggie gathered the courage to contact her mother. As soon as her daughter mentioned Mike, she immediately decided to return to the town, and hung up the phone. Meanwhile, Maggie's dad was on a date with Jessi's mom. They had been in a relationship for a while, since Jessi's mom was single, and Maggie's dad was about to get divorced from his wife. They were just waiting for the right moment to make it public. At this moment, Maggie's dad drove Jessi's mom home. They bid farewell with a kiss in front of the restaurant. Little did they know that this scene was witnessed by Jesse, who secretly recorded it. Jesse couldn't accept their relationship, as he hadn't yet overcome the shadow of losing his father, and his mom had already found a boyfriend. Jesse went to school unhappily. He found Maggie and wanted to talk to her. After all, they would likely become step-siblings. Jesse showed Maggie the video from earlier in the morning. She was very disappointed to see it. She couldn't believe her father would betray her mother. Jesse saw Maggie feeling down, so he tried to cheer her up. He introduced his pet to Maggie. It was a bunch of wriggling worms. He had brought them back from a Halloween party. He picked up a worm and pretended to eat it, as if he was going to swallow it. Unexpectedly, the worm actually crawled into Jesse's mouth. Maggie felt both disgusted and worried. She told him to hurry and go to the hospital. Jesse said it was okay. After all, they say worms are a good source of protein. Thanks to this accident, Maggie's mood improved a lot. After saying goodbye to Jesse, she left. That night, Jesse went to bed early, but the worms in the glass tank went into a frenzy. They pushed open the lid and crawled towards Jesse. They entered through his mouth, nostrils, and ear canals. The next day, Jesse woke up as if nothing had happened. His mom handed him a sandwich for breakfast. He took a bite and felt something was off, so he casually threw it into the trash can. He was about to leave, but he couldn't resist being drawn to the kitchen waste. The worms inside him changed Jesse's appetite. He started devouring lettuce leaves and soil. In addition, Jesse's body underwent changes. He gained the ability to regenerate like worms. Even if he snapped his finger, it would quickly heal. On the other hand, Helen resumed her classes. She noticed Colin and Maggie getting closer, which made her angry. Colin didn't want her to be involved, so he revealed that Maggie had helped him cheat to divert attention. He explained that their close relationship was due to this incident. Unfortunately, Helen didn't know her boyfriend's true intentions. She immediately reported it to the teacher, accusing Maggie of aiding in cheating. Colin was still unaware of the situation. He saw Jesse riding a dirt bike, and became more curious, so he asked Maggie what had happened yesterday. How does Jesse behave strangely? Maggie suddenly remembered the worms Jesse ate, which he took from Mike's house. Could it be that there is something wrong with the worms? She was about to call Jesse, but her dad called her into his office for a conversation. Undoubtedly, it was about the cheating incident. Maggie faced her father's accusations. She got angry and exposed his affair. They were arguing. Suddenly, the sound of a motorcycle came from outside. It turned out that Jesse planned to ride the bike across the building. His father was a motorcycle rider, and died in a stunt accident. Jesse had always wanted to complete the stunt his father couldn't. Fortunately, this time he broke only one arm. Maggie wanted to take him to the hospital. Unexpectedly, Jesse reattached his arm with his bare hands. Then he opened his shirt to show the healed wound, and Maggie saw beneath his skin a mass of wriggling tiny worms. Maggie realized the seriousness of the situation. She quickly went to tell Jesse's mom. When she heard that her son rode away on a motorcycle, she immediately guessed where Jesse was going. They drove to the destination together. This was where Jesse's dad had died. Jesse's mom stopped her impulsive son. She had already lost her husband. She couldn't lose her son in the same way. Jesse's mom told her son that her husband had left a suicide note before he died. He performed that stunt with the intention of seeking death. She was afraid of hurting her son. That's why she said his father died because of the stunt. Upon hearing this, Jesse violently vomited a large mass of worms, thus saving his own life. Suddenly, the ground shook. Those worms formed a gigantic monster. Jesse realized that they wanted to return inside him. He quickly rode his motorcycle down the mountain. The worm monster chased after him. Maggie and the others followed in their cars. Jesse accelerated and raced forward. The three of them rushed into a factory and closed the door, but the fragile iron door wouldn't hold for long. The worm monster broke through the door in an instant. In a critical moment, Maggie activated a slicing machine. Jesse rode his motorcycle and lured the monster onto the conveyor belt. The massive gears ground the worms into pulp. The crisis was finally resolved. The police quickly arrived at the scene. Jesse's mom told the kids to leave quickly. She stayed behind to handle things. But the police didn't believe in any monster claims. They even thought Jesse's mom had a mental illness. They put her in the hospital for observation. On the other side, Gene entered the factory. He was very saddened by the crushed worms, and determined to seek revenge for them. Ever since the incident with Jesse's mom, she has been kept under observation in the hospital. Maggie's dad took Jesse to his own house to take care of him, and soon Maggie's mom also returned. The atmosphere at the dinner table in the evening was very awkward. Maggie had many questions she wanted to ask her mom, but to avoid her father, she never found the opportunity to have a detailed conversation. That night, Maggie and Jesse went to James's house for a meeting, and Colin and others had already arrived. Colin broke up with Helen because of her betrayal. He had broken up with her. James was very happy to hear that. He always thought Colin and Maggie were a good match. In fact, for all these years, Colin had a slight crush on Maggie, and now he finally had a chance to pursue her. During the time Maggie spent with Jesse, she gradually discovered his good qualities. At that moment, Maggie kissed Jesse. Soon after, the two of them arrived at James's house. Maggie mentioned that her mom wasn't willing to say much, and she would have to focus on school for now, but she would find another opportunity to gather clues. However, trouble always finds its way to them. Maggie was studying in the library that day, when suddenly teacher Gene approached, saying that he had been cleaning the basement recently, and found a scrapbook, which had pictures of Maggie's mom. So he wanted Maggie to give it to her mother. Maggie couldn't resist her curiosity and opened the scrapbook, and the scenes from 1993 unfolded before her eyes. She saw her mom inviting Mike to the photography club, but then the voice of the administrator interrupted, bringing Maggie back to reality. The previous moments felt too real. She decided to visit the photography club at school. The club had been transformed into a video studio. Maggie closed the door and opened the scrapbook again. And indeed, she saw the photography club from 1993. Mike was showing Maggie's mom how to develop photos. They seemed to have a good relationship. Maggie quickly gathered her friends and told them about what just happened. Maggie speculated that if they returned to the location mentioned in the scrapbook and opened the corresponding page, they would be able to see what happened in 1993. She immediately went to the theater and opened the corresponding pages to test it. And indeed, she saw her mom and Mike standing on the stage. Mike appeared very frightened, constantly saying that something was going to harm him. But Maggie's mom was in a hurry to go on a date with her boyfriend and didn't pay any attention to Mike's words, which made him very angry. He grabbed Maggie's mom's hand, and the girl angrily shook off Mike's hand and left the theater. But then Mike suddenly looked at Maggie and trapped her in the illusion of the scrapbook. Colin and the others quickly noticed something was wrong. They saw Maggie's eyes completely black, and the scrapbook in her hands kept flipping until it finally stopped on the page with Mike's house. It seemed that in order to save Maggie, they had to go to Mike's house and enter the illusion. At this moment, the ghost of Mike was pulling Maggie, and standing in the yard, he pointed towards the cabin. Several people in black deliberately rang the doorbell, leading the basement Mike to the door, and then quietly sneaked inside. This was exactly the scene from the beginning of the movie. Maggie saw those people deliberately teasing Mike, which frightened him and made him run into the basement. The next moment, she transformed into the person falling into the basement, as Maggie was about to meet the same tragic fate as Mike. Fortunately, Colin and the others successfully entered the illusion and safely brought her out of the cabin. Several people were coughing incessantly on the grass. At this time, the pranksters also ran out of the house. They became extremely panicked when they saw the house on fire. They all took off their hats, and Maggie and the others were surprised to discover that this group of people were their parents. This childish and cruel prank caused Mike to be burned to death. They covered up the truth of the accident, carrying a mysterious box and leaving. Could it be that their parents were murderers? Maggie always felt that things weren't that simple, because earlier, Mike said someone wanted to harm him. And what was inside the box their parents were carrying?
You guys want to know what's in the case? Come inside. I'll tell you.
An aging magician picked up a mysterious puppet, and surprisingly, with its help, he became successful overnight. He was even invited to the White House to perform for the president. Little did he know that the puppet brought not only good luck.
No, I can't let this happen.
Maybe he could prevent the disaster this time, but couldn't stop the next one. On a night in 1993, a basement of a house suddenly caught fire, and a young man named Mike, who lived there, was burned to death. For 30 years, Mike's house remained abandoned, until Gene, a relative, inherited the property. He moved to the town and started working at the local high school, and a group of kids from the school decided to have a Halloween party in Mike's house. Little did they know, each of them would encounter supernatural events. Through their continuous investigation, they discovered the truth about Mike's death, which was likely connected to their own parents' pranks. Could their own family members be murderers? Just when everyone was puzzled, Gene claimed that he knew the truth. The story goes back to 1925. Gene's grandfather was a magician. He pursued his dreams in New York, but the city always had a fickle taste. His magic tricks quickly became outdated. In order to introduce a new act, he wanted to buy expensive magic props, but he had no money to buy anything. Just when he was at his wit's end, he saw an old wooden box. He used all his cash to buy the box, and showed it to his wife. It turned out the box contained a puppet named Slappy. His wife didn't understand his actions. She wanted him to give up being a magician. The grandfather ignored his wife's complaints. He played with Slappy contentedly, and found a note in the puppet's pocket. He recited the strange incantation written on it, but Slappy showed no response. However, in an instant when the grandfather turned around, the little puppet came to life. On the following day's performance, the grandfather took Slappy on stage. He dropped off the card, and to everyone's surprise, Slappy started speaking. The audience thought it was ventriloquism, and didn't notice anything wrong. The panicked grandfather didn't know what to do.
Enough. Finish your act. Trust me.
And so, Slappy became the magician's best partner. He made the grandfather's performances highly popular. The two of them traveled all over New York, and even performed at the White House for the president. And in the blink of an eye, it was 1960. People finally grew tired of puppet magic. The grandfather faced another crisis. The theater manager wanted to reduce his shows, but Slappy secretly incited the grandfather to kill the manager. It couldn't let anyone ruin their great magic performances. Under its instigation, the grandfather recited an incantation, turning the manager into a puppet. Slappy wasn't helping the grandfather for free. It made the grandfather dig up a wooden box from a graveyard. Inside, there was a more powerful incantation. The moment the grandfather touched it, he saw an illusion of a building on fire. Slappy forced him to recite the incantation to make the illusion come true. The grandfather finally realized that he had been manipulated by the puppet. He locked Slappy inside the wooden box. 2 weeks later, the grandfather arrived at Lawrence Harbor. He bought a small house to spend his remaining years. That house was Mike's home. The grandfather sealed the suitcase in the wall, hoping the puppet would sleep forever, until Mike's parents inherited the property in 1993, and moved into the spacious villa. Mike enjoyed keeping insects as pets. He had been bullied at his previous school. This time, after a difficult move, he changed schools. His parents hoped he would make a change. His dad even gave him a Polaroid camera, suggesting he join the school's photography club. To proactively make friends, Mike followed his dad's advice. He went to the photography club's booth to sign up, and that's where he met Sarah, Maggie's mother. The two of them shared the same interests and hobbies, often spending time together in the darkroom developing photos. Sarah felt that Mike was too introverted, so she invited him to a party on the weekend. Mike initially didn't want to go, but he couldn't resist Sarah's invitation. That night, he pulled out all his clothes, standing in front of the mirror, changing one outfit after another. But after the excitement wore off, a wave of inexplicable disappointment washed over him. Mike felt that no matter what he wore, it made no difference. Girls like Sarah would never be interested in him. In the end, he didn't go to the party. Mike stayed in the basement. He grabbed things from the table and threw them against the wall, and unexpectedly discovered the suitcase. Mike liked Slappy very much, and soon found the note hidden under the clothes. He casually recited the incantation, unintentionally awakening Slappy. Mike didn't know the secret behind it. The next day, he carried the suitcase to school, but his parents stopped him. They were afraid of their son being mocked by classmates because of the puppet. They wanted him to leave Slappy at home. Mike explained that everyone in drama class had to perform on stage. He could use Slappy for ventriloquism. The couple watched their son leave, fearing he would be seen as a freak by his classmates. Meanwhile, during the drama class at school, the scene from the past was replayed. Mike was startled by the talking Slappy, but the puppet helped him win applause. Mike looked at Sarah applauding. He felt that the puppet was a gift from heaven, so he followed his grandfather's old path, gradually becoming a puppet's puppet. Mike became irritable and easily angered, spending all day talking to the puppet. His parents felt it couldn't go on like this, so they put Slappy into the fireplace to burn it, but it unexpectedly wouldn't burn. Right after that, Mike came back. He rushed to the fireplace to rescue Slappy, and under its temptation, he turned his parents into puppets. Mike hurt the two people who loved him the most. Not long after, it was the performance night for the class of '93. He went on stage with Slappy. Unexpectedly, the puppet exposed the secrets of Sarah and others in front of everyone, causing them to lose face. After the performance ended, Sarah approached Mike and questioned him. Why did he betray his friends? But Mike had already been brainwashed by Slappy, believing that Sarah befriended him out of superiority, rather than genuine friendship. Sarah didn't understand why he thought that way, but she felt that the problem was with the puppet. Ever since Slappy appeared, Mike became abnormal, so Sarah and her friends discussed together, planning to steal Slappy and destroy it. As night fell, they purposely rang the doorbell to distract Mike, then quietly sneaked into the room to steal the suitcase. But Slappy suddenly became angry, causing a power outage in the entire house. Nervous Mike hurriedly lit candles, and ran into the basement. Everyone approached and knocked on the door, trying to keep Mike away from the puppet, but he slipped and fell down the stairs. The candle ignited the basement, leading to a disaster. Sarah and others couldn't open the basement door, so they had to escape with the suitcase. In order to not ruin their future, they chose to keep tonight's events a secret, and buried the puppet in an old mine. This is the truth behind the fire incident that happened years ago. After listening to Jean's narration, they were both shocked and relieved. Fortunately, everyone's parents didn't have the intention to kill Mike. The main culprit behind all of this was Slappy. Jean was stunned when he heard this. In fact, he had long been possessed by Mike's ghost, and up until now, he still believed that Slappy was his good friend. Sarah and the others were the real culprits. Today, Jean is telling this story. His intention was to let the children know the true face of their parents, but they ended up thinking Slappy was the culprit. And at that moment, Sarah's daughter, Maggie, asked a crucial question. How do you know about all of this? Mike, upon hearing this, revealed his true form. It's time to retrieve Slappy, and then he disappeared into thin air. Maggie and her friends wanted to leave this place, but they forgot that this place was not the real world. The five of them entered through a scrapbook, but the book had been taken by Mike. They hoped their parents would find them. Little did they know, Jean had already used their phones to send messages to their parents, stating they would be staying overnight at a friend's house. Then he went to find Jessie's mom, who had just been discharged from the hospital. It was her suggestion years ago to bury Slappy. Later, Mike took over Jean's body to retrieve the suitcase from the mine, but he didn't find the puppet. He demanded Jesse's mom to hand over Slappy, but she heard this and ran out of the elevator to escape. Jesse's mom ran home and put the puppet in a bag. Unexpectedly, Maggie's dad arrived. He wasn't part of the small group back then, so he naturally didn't know about the puppet. He came this time just to invite Jesse's mom for dinner, but she hurriedly left with the bag, and drove away from the town. Little did she know, a red car was quietly following behind. Maggie's dad found Jesse's mom's behavior strange, so he went to ask his friend Carter what had happened back then. "Why do I feel like you all have secrets?" Little did they know, Carter heard that Jesse's mom took the puppet. He quickly drove away from his house, leaving only Maggie's dad behind. Meanwhile, in the scrapbook world, the 5 children heard strange noises coming from the restaurant. Could there be someone else in this house? They immediately picked up weapons to defend themselves. Unexpectedly, Gene walked out the next second, and it was the real consciousness of Gene. He has been trapped here for a long time, unable to find an exit. Just then, the Asian girl Bella saw light coming from the crack under the door. She opened the door and looked down, seemingly seeing a room at the end. The group immediately took down the curtains and made a rope, wanting to approach the source of light and check the situation. Bella volunteered to go down first. She tied the rope around her waist. The others held onto the other end. They also made a secret signal. 1 pull means everything is fine. 2 pulls mean they should quickly pull Bella up. Once everything was ready, Bella grabbed the rope and slid into the abyss. To their surprise, the source of light at the end turned out to be a school, but it is clearly not the current school, because she saw Mike's locker with Sarah's photo still attached inside. Just then, laughter came from not far away. Bella walked into the theater, and saw the audience seats filled with dolls. They are most likely humans transformed by a spell. Feeling scared, Bella quickly went back and pulled the rope, but Mike seemed to sense something, and immediately tore out the page of the school from the scrapbook. Immediately after, the illusory campus started to collapse. The others sensed Bella and pulled the rope twice. They wanted to pull her back into the room. Unexpectedly, the fabric in their hands slipped. The end of the rope, Gene, bumped into the door frame. Unexpectedly, this collision briefly brought him back to his physical body, and he was sitting in the red car tracking Jesse's mom. Gene saw the scrapbook placed in the passenger seat. With this thing, he could rescue everyone. However, he was quickly bounced back into the illusion. At this moment, Colin, who was leading the group, was pulling the rope with great effort. They could see the fabric about to tear. Fortunately, they pulled Bella up in time. Bella told everyone about what she saw and heard below. On the other side, Carter and James's mom drove to the mine together. Both of them were members of Sarah's small group back then. Carter grabbed the rope and ventured deep into it. He wanted to see if the buried puppets were still there. However, he didn't find anything. Then he heard James's voice from above, but it wasn't the real James. It was a counterfeit created by Mike. Suddenly, he let go of Carter's rope, trapping him inside the mine. James's mom was waiting in the car for Carter. She actually saw her son's figure. Of course, she didn't know it was a counterfeit. She quickly got out of the car to check on him. Unexpectedly, James picked up a stick. He made her pay the price for Mike's death. James's mom only realized this then. This person was not her son at all, just as James was about to strike. Fortunately, Carter appeared just in time. Don't ask how he managed to climb out. Just attribute it to the plot armor. The two of them teamed up to deal with the imposter. They also realized that Jesse's mom was not wrong. Mike's ghost had returned. The scene switched back to the youth group. Gene, after the previous collision, suddenly found a way out. He asked everyone to beat him up. Bella eagerly rushed forward to beat up the teacher. Gene indeed returned to his physical body, and he discovered that Mike was tracking Jesse's mom. Unfortunately, the time for recovery was limited. The next second, he was pulled back into the illusion. Gene told everyone about the tracking incident. As soon as Jesse heard that his mom was in trouble, she went up and punched him back into his physical body. This time, Gene quickly grabbed the scrapbook. Unfortunately, Mike inside his body was struggling fiercely. Both of them wanted to claim ownership of the body. In the midst of their struggle, the scrapbook was thrown into a water pit. Immediately, the house in the illusion started to leak water. The walls slowly began to deform. The 5 of them ended up on the second page, because the paper got soaked. Gene quickly got off the car to remedy the situation, but his right hand firmly held onto the car door. In a critical moment, Gene bit his hands back. Only then did he manage to free himself from the car door. However, the right hand controlled by Mike still refused to let go. It tried to prevent him from picking up the scrapbook. Passers-by saw Gene rolling on the ground. They thought they had encountered a lunatic. By this time, the group of 5 had already leaked into the basement. Unexpectedly, they saw Mike's parents there. They were waiting for their son to leave together. While they were talking, Gene took out a pen, and found the page where the youth group was located. He drew a door on it. The group successfully left the illusion. They returned to the real world. Yet Gene couldn't escape the control. He was locked up by Mike once again. Meanwhile, Jesse's mom was still driving, and gradually approaching a high-altitude mountain area. Snowflakes were already drifting around. She parked the car outside a wooden house. Then she changed her clothes and took a shovel. To her surprise, as soon as she opened the door, she saw a police officer. The officer came to patrol because of the snowstorm, and reminded residents not to wander around. He noticed Jesse's mom looking nervous, and there was a bag behind her. He insisted on coming in to inspect. Jesse's mom had no choice but to empty the contents of the bag. The dismantled slappy fell to the ground. The police officer, seeing the situation, left with peace of mind. Meanwhile, Mike was rushing to the scene, although he was attached to Jean, but for the convenience of distinction, we'll refer to him as Mike from now on. When they arrived at the checkpoint on the mountain road, Mike lied, saying he was following his friend's car, but he got separated halfway. Fortunately, the police officer from earlier was there. He heard Mike describing his friend as having blonde hair, so he kindly approached and gave directions, while the police officer refused to let him through, because the road conditions were too bad at the moment. Every vehicle had to have snow chains to enter the mountain. Mike had no choice but to turn around. However, he didn't go back to town to buy snow chains. Instead, he parked the car by the roadside. He planned to walk through a shortcut to rescue Slappy. Meanwhile, the youth group was also following Jesse's mom. They drove halfway. They spotted Mike's small red car. There were footprints left nearby. Jesse recognized at a glance that it was the path to the cabin. He was worried about his mom's safety. Ignoring Maggie's attempts to stop him, he plunged into the woods. The others were concerned about him. They ultimately decided that Maggie and Colin would follow him. James and Bella stayed in the car and waited. Meanwhile, Slappy's severed head kept talking incessantly. It wanted Jesse's mom to put it back together. Little did it know that she taped its mouth shut. Jesse's mom carried Slappy and went outside. To her surprise, she saw Mike ahead. She quickly got into the car and locked the doors. Unexpectedly, the car wouldn't start at a critical moment. Desperate, Mike rushed over and smashed the car window. He grabbed Jesse's mom by the collar. In a critical moment, the car finally started. Jesse's mom frantically reversed the car. After much effort, she managed to shake off Mike. Unfortunately, the unlucky car stalled again. She had to get out of the car with the bag and escape. Meanwhile, Mike, with his injured leg, caught up. The two of them ran frantically on the mountain road, one in front and one behind. Mike was soon left behind due to his injury. Jesse's mom risked her life to enter the forest. By the time Jesse and the others arrived at the cabin, the two of them had already disappeared. Little Jesse was extremely anxious and immediately entered the forest. The snow was still falling at this time. Jesse's mom hid behind a big tree to take cover. Meanwhile, Mike yelled not far away. After his voice gradually faded away, Jesse's mom then lifted the bag and continued running forward. Little did she know, after running only a few steps, Mike suddenly pounced on her and tried to snatch the bag. Jesse's mom kicked him away. She quickly got up and continued running. While a life-or-death pursuit was happening here, James and Bella, on the other hand, were chatting about emotional gossip. They even got hungry while in the middle of their conversation. At that moment, the parents' group arrived at the scene. James' mom hesitated to approach her son, afraid that the person in front of her might also be an imposter.
Are you drunk?
It is you. I know that's not anywhere.
Bella's mom quickly went forward and hugged her daughter. Young and old moved forward toward the cabin together. Along the way, Bella revealed everything that had happened recently. On the other side, little Jesse was still searching for his mom. He loudly called out her name. Jesse's mom was exhausted. She thought she was hallucinating when she heard her son's voice. The familiar voice was getting closer and closer. She quickly responded. Both sides couldn't see each other's location. They could only move towards the sound. Jesse's mom looked ahead and suddenly stopped. The limping figure was all too familiar. Isn't this Mike?
Thought I would find you, but you came right to me!
That big brother's laughter is quite terrifying. Jesse's mom had exhausted her strength. She hadn't run very far. She was grabbed by Mike. He snatched the backpack from her. He threw Jesse's mom into a snow pit. Mike quickly took out Slappy. Then he ripped off the tape from Slappy's mouth.
Hello, old friend.
Jesse and the other two wandered in circles for a while. They were carefully moving along the cliff. Colin had his arm in a cast. It was hard for him to maintain balance. He accidentally slipped and fell. By the time the others noticed he was missing, the two teams had already separated. Colin was holding onto a vine at this moment. Beneath him was a bottomless abyss. On the other side, Jesse and the others were about to turn back. However, they accidentally noticed the abandoned bag on the ground, and Jesse's mom was lying beneath it. Fortunately, she was okay. Jesse woke up his mom. He said he already knew everything. We must stop Mike. The mother and son hugged each other. The scene was incredibly heartwarming.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, man.
It seemed that relying on others was useless. Colin risked his casted hand. He desperately grabbed onto the vine and climbed up. It was not easy, but he finally reached the edge.
Hello.
Mike looked at Colin. He picked up a stone. Then Jesse's mom caught up. She tried to make Mike sober up a bit. She urged him not to be controlled by Slappy anymore. Unfortunately, Mike had completely lost his sanity. Colin's situation was extremely urgent. At a critical moment, Maggie called him Little Bear. When they saw Mike's parents in the illusion earlier, that's how they called their son. The endearing nickname brought back some sanity to Mike. At that moment, Sarah and the others arrived at the scene.
You're my friend, my sweet, brilliant friend. And we tried to save you.
Fortunately, Colin is an athlete with a good physique. Otherwise, if they had talked a little longer, he would have died. Finally, the guilt towards his parents awakened Mike. He turned around and pulled Colin up to the shore. Then he grabbed Slappy and threw him off the cliff. Immediately after, Jean vomited Mike out. Sarah was not afraid of her completely changed friend. Instead, she looked into his eyes sincerely. Those unspoken teenage feelings have always been real. Before Mike disappeared, he returned to his original appearance. The souls of his parents also came to take him on his journey. Teacher Jean regained his consciousness. Everyone supported each other as they descended the mountain. And down below, the fragmented Slappy opened his eyes once again. Time goes back 6 months. At that time, Jean was still teaching in Portland. However, he had never been valued. He even suffered complaints from students, and was fired by the principal. The landlord also came to demand rent. After much effort, he managed to get a 3-day extension. Unfortunately, his pet dog was hit and killed by a car. Just when Jean felt hopeless about life, suddenly, a real estate company approached him. They informed him that he had inherited his great-grandfather's estate. Little did he know, there would be so many unexpected events later. Fortunately, Jean now had a home and a job. He could peacefully live out the rest of his life. He planned to turn his recent experiences into a novel, fulfilling his dream of becoming a writer. Jean envisioned the ending of the story in his manuscript. The 5 brave teenagers returned to their ordinary lives. Baseball player Colin was in the process of rehabilitation. His father hoped he would return to his peak condition. However, after experiencing so many accidents, Colin was wavering in his belief to continue playing baseball. As for James and Bella, they had become close and intimate friends. Yet James recently fell in love. This made Bella feel a sense of being abandoned. As for Maggie, she finally let go of her unrequited love for Colin. She gradually embraced Jesse's love. Everything was so perfect. But this was only Jean's envisioned ending. In reality, there would be differences for sure. For example, Maggie was considering moving to Seattle with her mother. Jesse and Colin both felt reluctant in their hearts, but they didn't show it. Meanwhile, the publishing company quickly contacted Jean. They said they were very satisfied with the story, while they believed the ending could be more exciting. For example, by further exploring the story of the puppet Slappy, this would leave the readers wanting more. This way, a whole series of books could be created. Jean was very excited about this, but he didn't have a real framework to guide him. He couldn't come up with a creative ending at all. Jean decided to go for a drive to find inspiration. He drove along the main road. He accidentally discovered that it was the direction to Sailor Mountain. That was where he had thrown away Slappy. A frightening thought came to Jean's mind. He immediately entered the mountainous area to find Slappy. The eerie puppet lay ahead. Jean's desire for success clouded his mind. He actually brought Slappy back home. Jean took out the note from inside the puppet's costume. He took a deep breath and recited the spell, but the puppet didn't respond. Jean laughed at himself, but in the moment he turned around. Slappy reassembled and came back to life once again.
And I'm about to give you the greatest ending of all time.
As soon as the words fell, the pet dog specimen on the wall came back to life. The pet dog, Fifi, led Jean into the woods, and hinted for him to dig the soil. Jean wanted to tease her a little. On the other side, Colin and the others planned to take Maggie to Seattle for the weekend. They also planned to have a road trip. Jesse's mood had been low all along. The group of 5 quickly arrived in Seattle. Sarah rented a large house for the kids. She wanted them to have a fun weekend. Bella wanted to go buy ice cream at the corner of the street. So, she pulled James and Jesse along. With that, only Colin and Maggie were left at home. The atmosphere was incredibly awkward. Colin asked her if she had made a decision. Was she really going to move to Seattle? Maggie expressed that she really wanted a fresh start, and her father was also starting a new family. The only thing she couldn't let go of was Jesse. The next day, Maggie and Jesse went to buy donuts. She wanted to have a good conversation with him. However, they had different visions for the future. Maggie yearned for a distant city, whereas Jesse only wanted to inherit his mother's pork shop after graduation. They were simply not the same kind of person. In the evening, Maggie took everyone to her cousin's party. Jesse found himself among strangers. and longed more for Lawrence Harbor. He liked the life there. He couldn't deceive Maggie. The two of them eventually erupted into an argument. Jesse left the party alone. When Maggie and the others returned home, they realized he hadn't come back. There was only a note left on the table. It said, "Sorry, I'm going back home." Meanwhile, Gene dug out a coffin from the soil, and following Slappy's instructions, he recited an incantation. A scene of a big fire flashed in his mind. At the moment the incantation was completed, the puppet lost its magical abilities, because his true self had entered the coffin. A withered corpse crawled out from it. In an instant, it regained a healthy flesh body. It was at this moment that Carter came looking for Gene. The mysterious man, Kandu, raised his hand, and turned him into a puppet. Who is this person exactly? In 1879, Kandu was just an ordinary soldier at that time. He was shot in the abdomen and knocked down by artillery fire. He fell into an underground space. Kandu covered his wound and stood up. Suddenly, he smelled the scent of kerosene. He quickly took out a lighter and ignited it. A stone wall appeared in front of him. It was densely carved with incantations. There was also a carving of a tower in the middle. At that moment, one line of the spell lit up with golden light. Kandu tried to recite it aloud. The next second, his gunshot wound healed. He miraculously regained his health. Kandu immediately wrote down all the incantations with pen and paper. In 1885, he arrived at the carnival in New York. He entered one of the doll product shops. The shopkeeper recognized him as the famous magician. However, Kandu despised that title. He casually resurrected the puppet on the table. He showed the shopkeeper real magic. Kandu said, "I will turn this deserted carnival into the most popular place, but you must help me build a wooden tower." 1 year later, the carnival flourished. While the shopkeeper noticed something was wrong with Kandu, he was turning the audience into puppet people. He also mentioned something about a ceremony. The shopkeeper realized that this couldn't go on. He had been influenced for a whole year. He also learned a few spells. So, he helped Kandu create Slappy. The shopkeeper took advantage of the other's admiration. He wanted to turn Kandu into a puppet as well. Little did he know, the latter stabbed him in the abdomen. The shopkeeper, holding on to his last breath, finished reciting the spell. He sealed Kandu inside Slappy. Now Kandu has regained his freedom. He must complete the ceremony from years ago, to turn 1,000 living people into puppets, and then place them on the spire for burning as a sacrifice. At this moment, Jesse returned home, only to see his long-deceased father. He instantly froze in place. His father explained that he was a crucial witness in a murder case. He claimed to be dead in order to cooperate with the police. Jesse didn't believe this explanation, but his mother confirmed that his father hadn't lied. He longed for his father's embrace. Just as he was about to rush over, he was turned into a puppet. It turned out that Kandu disguised as his father. He controlled Jesse's mother to act in a play. Soon, other friends also encountered similar situations. Over at Colin's place, just as he returned home, he saw the coach from Washington University. They had prepared a full scholarship contract, requesting Colin to join them. Faced with his parents' eager gaze, Colin could only take the pen, but he suddenly noticed that the wound on his wrist had disappeared. Colin immediately realized that something was wrong. On the other side, James was stopped by his dream lover who confessed to him. Maggie discovered that her parents had reconciled. She was almost in tears of joy. Fortunately, Colin arrived in time. He reminded Maggie that it was all fake. Just as he finished speaking, Kandu revealed his true form. Maggie's father had already been turned into a puppet. Colin and the other quickly escaped. James and Bella happened to arrive in their car. They also saw through Kandu's trickery.
I knew the second I got home that something was wrong.
How?
Because when I walked in, my mom said,
It's so nice to see you.
Bella's mother would never speak like that. Now the four of them planned to find little Jesse and regroup. To their surprise, there was no one in the house. Just as they were getting anxious, Jesse rode past on a motorcycle in a flash. They quickly got in their car and chased after him. They chased him until nightfall before catching up. Just then, the controlled parents arrived at the scene. They captured the children near the square. In front of them stood a huge tower. All the residents of the town, except for the 4 children and Jean, had all been turned into puppets. At this moment, Kandu appeared, and took them back to the battlefield of the past. He stood once again in front of the wall filled with inscriptions. He said he wanted to complete the sacrifice of 1,000 people, to open the gates of hell and reshape the world, creating a homeland without war. Kandu left with the words, "Kill them," and then turned around and left the tent. Fifi heard her owner's words. She immediately entered a combat mode. Jean didn't expect things to turn out this way. He quietly grabbed the feather pen on the table. He personally destroyed Fifi's illusion. Jean decided to stop Kandu, save the villagers and atone for his actions. But how can he stop the ritual? Jean indeed has a solution. It turns out his great-grandfather was the puppet shop owner back then. The shop owner left behind a notebook. It contains the method to break the spell. Kandu was about to ignite the tower, burning the puppet residents inside. Unexpectedly, the shop owner emerged from the tent. He said the children resurrected him with a spell. Just when everyone hoped the shop owner would display his powers, he told Kandu that it was his own short-sightedness back then. Now we can work together to rebuild a perfect world. As the shop owner said this, he took the torch and ignited the wooden blocks under the tower. Kandu looked at the roaring flames and smiled, but in the next moment, he turned into a puppet. It turns out that all of this was an illusion created by the spell. The shop owner was actually Jean disguised. Everyone quickly searched for the spell to revive the residents, but Kandu suddenly returned to normal. Colin held the spellbook and warned him, "If you dare to make a move, I'll burn the book." But Kandu remained indifferent, because he had already memorized the spell. Kandu slowly walked towards the tower. Dark mist enveloped the teenagers. Colin discovered that the spellbook could break the dark mist. He broke free and handed the book to Maggie. Then he lunged at Kandu to buy time. Maggie anxiously flipped through the spellbook. Finally, she found the spell to restore everything. All magic vanished in an instant. Kandu transformed back into his injured form. The souls he had killed reached out from the ground, trying to drag Kandu back to hell. He pulled out a gun and fired. Just as he was about to hit Maggie, Colin quickly stepped in and blocked the bullets. In the end, Kandu was dragged into hell. The villagers returned to normal. Only Colin remained unconscious. Grieving, Maggie sat in front of the hospital room. As long as Colin can regain consciousness, she is willing to pay any price. Maggie recites the spell from the book to bring Colin back. Meanwhile, Jean is once again possessed by Kandu. This season's story comes to an end. The pace is fast, and the plot is smooth without dragging. Plus, it incorporates elements of horror. It revolves around a youth ensemble theme. Definitely worth watching. Book fans can also see the classic stories from the original work. Although it lacks a striking novelty, as a series to pass the time, it's sufficient. The performances of the young actors are also impressive. Let's look forward to the second season together.